right. And so we are live now. Perfect. And then, and like I said, towards the top of the hour, then we'll start the overall broadcast. So
sounds great.
Hi, Jesse. So we're just getting organized. So we'll be just hanging out here chatting until for the next minute or so as people join in. So welcome.
Where are you located, Sophie?
I am located in Brighton in the UK, actually. That's why it's dark outside. Yeah, because it's the evening hours already. And I've moved here for my studies and just stayed because I really enjoyed it.
Oh, very nice. That's great. So what time is it there now? It's
5.
11 here. 5. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
so it's getting
depending on the
end
time you
of
listen to this.
my working day, and it's starting for you.
Well, we have a Brighton here in Colorado too, so it's funny that you have a Brighton.
Yeah. Yeah, located in the south, just south from London. Actually, it's not very far.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start the multi-stream right now, and we'll get going. So in just a few more minutes.
I love your topic, well-being. I like to talk it. My version of that, I call it the healthy employer.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, so let's go ahead and kick things off. So I just want to welcome everyone to the People Strategy Forum. We have a great speaker today from Gradar, and we're going to be talking about enhancing the employee well-being and specifically talking about change. As there's a lot of change that's going on again in the marketplace, so we'll be talking about that. So first of all, just a quick just a little bit of background about what the People Strategy Forum is here, and what our purpose of what we're trying to do here is. Our mantra here is we're trying to engage, energize, and elevate your employees and your company, and we do that through bringing these innovative ideas, having some great speakers to kind of elevate the overall practice of talent and rewards to give everyone a better workforce experience. Now, a couple of housekeeping items as we get started here. We're starting off broadcasting off the Zoom platform, and so if you are joining us here live, you can go ahead and ask questions on the just by going through the chat, and we'll be monitoring that through the session today. Matter of fact, I have to make sure that I turn it on so that everybody can feel free to chat through there. And then we're also doing a multicast through LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. That's where much of our audience comes through. And so you happen to be on one of those platforms and you have questions, feel free to put it into the comment section, and then we'll have people on our team get back to you on those questions and direct you to the right people. Now, eventually, this will be released into the People Strategy Forum podcast in a few weeks. So this is your first live taste on the content, and then and you can, if you want to listen to it, the podcast, you can see it there at a later time. All right, a bit of about our hosts that are on here today. We do have a few people that are not able to join right now. We have about here we have Howard Nizewitz is a compensation and total reward systems professional, and so Howard has over 25 years of experience in the compensation and systems world, and so he comes well recommended here at Comp Team. Then we also have Sumit Singla. Sumit is out of India, has a lot of deep expertise in people strategies, worked at a lot of very large consulting firms in the past, and now he's out doing things on his own, and we're happy to have him as part of the Comp Team as well. So thank you, Sumit, for joining us today. And then Char Miller. Char Miller is our small business expert. She's a serial entrepreneur, has her own coaching practice around career coaching, and also in HR practices. She's a people expert and has a deep expertise as a CHRO. So welcome, Char. All right, and then of course our expert contributor today is Sophie Janke, and so she is from Gradar. She is a implementation consultant there, but she has a deep amount of expertise in a lot of areas. And so one of the pieces that Gradar is famous for is helping companies with their gender pay gap reporting, doing a very robust job evaluation process. So that we can address a lot of those needs that we have today and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before Sophie joined Gradar, as you can see here in her bio, she studied in media and business and psychology at the university, or what university were you in? And is that in Berlin? Is that right? Sophie?
Yeah, the university is called HMKW, so Hochschule für Medienkommunikation und Wirtschaft, which basically translates into the University of Applied Science in Berlin.
Nice. And so Sophie, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Gradar, your passions around the psychology field and so forth? How did you come about that?
Yeah, happy to do that. So maybe I'll start with my studies. So I always had a really big interest for how people how people differ from one another, and how different their reactions are to specific things happening in their environment. And I think it's fundamental, because every one of us spends, or like most of us spend eight hours a day at work. So we do spend most of our day in the workplace. So it's really, really important to look at what we can do to actually make this an enjoyable experience for people, and not something that they just tick off from their day and just say, okay, well, I've been to work, I've made my money to live, but actually, contribute something to the overall world, I want to say, to the society. But in order to do that, we really need to look at what we can offer, so that everyone thrives at work, and everyone, goes to work and actually enjoys doing that. So yeah, that's how I quickly realized I'm really, really interested in looking at the psychological aspects of people, what motivates them, why they differ at different personalities, and then transfer that into the workplace environment to see how we can really, support every single person in their work life, to make them as productive as they can be, and obviously while doing that also keep in mind their well-being, and support them throughout everyday activities outside of work as well.
Well, it's definitely an important topic. I mean, right now, I mean, we're just, I mean, I don't know how long we've been saying that the pace of change is just increasing and increasing, but I mean, it's the reality is that it just gets more and more and more, and it just happens faster and faster. And so, I mean, just recently, I mean, we're looking at the past few years. I mean, the amount of, we've been going this direction and that direction through the pandemic, and the Great Resignation and so forth. And now we're dealing with the economy and the fallout in the economy and inflation and potential layoffs that are going on right now across a lot of industries. And so we've just heard tons of layoffs that are going on in technology in the United States and so forth that people are dealing with. And still, even with layoffs, I mean, there's companies that are saying, hey, the employment market is still hot in some areas. And so it's a crazy pace that we're dealing with. And so I'm thankful that you're here to help us with this change and discuss the topic in detail, Sophie.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the introduction.
So one of the things, I think there's a lot of different types of change models. And Char, I mean, I know as an HR professional, you're familiar with some of the traditional change models that have been in place. I mean, what are you familiar with?
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and list off every single change model, but I was just sharing with Sophie that I worked with healthcare systems that had so many change models that was going on in the healthcare system at any given time, and change agents and project managers, et cetera, and consultants, to the point where it was chaos, just focusing on all the change models and which one are we going to follow. So also, I totally agree. Change is more rapid now than ever. And I can imagine in some of these large, because I now work more as an entrepreneur, but these large executive industries that are really struggling with technology changes and layoffs and governmental changes, federal changes, it's mind-boggling. Last comment I'll say is, like, in one of my companies, for example, the federal changes was really impacting one of my companies. And it got to the point where we couldn't keep up with the changes at all. So we had to temporarily shut down to assure that we're compliant and legal, which impacted our employees and our business operations. So it's just extremely vital. And so we just have to work smarter, better together is my overall model.
And if I can just quickly kind of add to this, I think it's quite important to say that there's so many different change models, and that is exactly because there's no approach that works for every organization. There might be global problems that affect most of the organizations. However, how these changes are then brought into the organization and what the organization then changes internally is so different and unique from one organization to another. And obviously every organization will have different resources and, you know, different, you know, like context that they can bring these changes to life, or like can react to these changes. That it's really, really important to recognize as well as an organization and as a responsible person in an organization, that there is no single model that you can just Google and research that you can apply to your organization. Everything always has to be kind of individualized to the situation of the organization, to the size, to what people are employed there. So it's quite important to realize that there's millions of models out there that can be applied, but they always have to be taken with a pinch of salt.
Right. Well, and even if it is one organization's change, also every single department or function within that department has their own separate types of challenges and change. You know, from the logistics department to the materials management department to the sales department to even the cleaning departments. I mean, it could be any what, you know, shape or form, or HR. But, you know, hey, Sumit, I know you've got an idea about change. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right, Char and Sophie. There are lots of models floating around, but typically what I've seen how to adapt or how to customize to different departments is usually you'll have people who are positive or happy about change, which will be in the minority. So maybe a couple of percentage, a couple of percent of people. Mostly people who are denying, saying this is not going to affect me, or people who are angry saying it wasn't broken, why are they going around fixing it? And eventually all of this leads to what's called the paralysis phase, where people are in a state of limbo. So nobody knows what to do next. And that's where you start figuring out what's right for your department, because there are some people who would be like, I'll do what's required to survive and not get thrown out. So kind of like what's called quiet quitting. Another set of people would probably walk out on their own and say, I didn't sign up for this. We're not going in the right direction. I'm leaving. And the third category is people who start saying, well, the change is here to stay and I might as well adapt to it. And some of them, they start committing to that change. So I think the idea for every department is to minimize the number of people who are trying to leave. And the ones who are sitting on the fence, who are like, I'll wait and watch and meanwhile survive, flipping them over into the ones who are willing to fight. So basically the three reactions: fight, flight, and freeze. The idea is to maximize the ones who are willing to step up and take the change head on. And that's where maybe change champions or evangelists who help people see, if not an entirely positive change, it could be a toxic merger, it could be a takeover of an organization like what we're seeing right now. But how do you still make it positive for the people who are who are in there? And I mean, it's interesting to think about, because in the context of one of the current tech organizations that's just been taken over, everyone's talking about the folks who've been laid off. no one's talking about the folks who have to stay there and deal with what seems to be a very toxic brand of leadership.
Yeah. And so with a lot of the points that you just brought up, I've got so many ideas that I want to contribute, but I'm going to start saying, I'm going to start by underlining one of the points that you have just said. People love routines. That's what they live for. They absolutely strive for routines every day, whether it's at work, at home, or, you know, anything. And I think it's really important to mention here that people will really, and it doesn't matter what kind of type you are, you know, if you want to drive a change or not, people or employees in an organization will really only drive the change when they're convinced that it's only the right idea to reject the status quo. And even if members are not satisfied with the status quo, they need to really see that whatever is changing will improve the situation for them. So in this point, it's really important to communicate the changes and really make sure that employees understand what they get out of this. So what can improve for them specifically when you introduce the change? What is their unique advantage that they can take away from? And if they don't understand that the status quo is not how we can, or like how an organization can continue, they will never really support the change. So that's one tip right at the beginning here. Always communicate on why the change is happening, why it can't stay the way it is, and make sure that your employees, like that your communication reaches every single employee, because otherwise you will not find these change champions that you were just talking about, Sumit. So I think that's a really, really important point here, and that's why I wanted to just underline that as well.
So I think that's great. One thing we're going to talk about communication specifically, because I know that's core here, and I know Sumit has a lot of things to talk about that. But really quick, I want to go back to what you mentioned about routines, and one thing is I know that when you were dealing with catastrophic change, it could be something that happened that was very negative. Or impactful to a lot of people, like a lot of change is. I mean, you mentioned the importance of those routines, having certain anchors that they can rely on that brings them back to that normal space. You know, that, you know, a lot of us use, you know, exercise or meditation, things like this to kind of be those anchors throughout the day. But is that what you're talking about, Sophie, when you're mentioning routines?
Yeah, so routine seeking is one of the factors, one of the sub-factors that is really important when we look at why people may resist change, because they are seeking these routines. There's differences, and that's what your overall topic is about, because maybe for everyone listening, to give a bit of background, I have done extensive research into why different personality types resist changes and what might cause them to, you know, come up with this resistance. Is that a disposition, inclination to resist changes? Is that within behaviors? Or can we change this resistance with context factors? And what I found with my study, or after I've done the study, is that the resistance to change that you will see in organizations is way more related to a person's or to an employee's personality than it is to context factors. And there is people, or like there is studies stating that up to 70, and I'm going to take this with caution, let's just say, you know, a bit less, but up to 70% of the changes that get introduced in organizations actually fail. And that is because of poor management of that change. That doesn't necessarily mean that the change process itself is not managed well, but that means that leaders and the ones, you know, driving this change, the ones initiating the change, are not open enough to see how people react to changes. So it's the management of emotions that we see that is failing a lot of the time. The management of the reactions of single employees in the organization that there is not enough focus on, and that's why this change often then fails. And it's not actually that the structures is not, that the structure of the change, or like how the process unfolds, is not managed well. It's really about how leaders react to these emotions. And then to get back to your point as well, Sam, I mean, there is different personality types, and everyone kind of has a different preference. And there is personality types that are more open to changes, like from their upbringing and from their personality. And as we all know, that We can not really change personalities. We can't change factors that shape personalities, but we can't change a personality itself. So you will naturally find individuals within organizations that are more inclined to resist changes. And that is because they have more problems to kind of deal with their emotions or with their own reaction to change. And when we talk about routine seeking specifically, there are individuals that are more routine seeking than others. So for example, individuals with a high level of neuroticism within their personality, for example, they are more routine seeking. So what they need to be able to manage their own emotions is to have the opportunity to come up with new routines in their everyday life. So the point I'm making here is we are all super different, and one person might really need that routine, and the other person says every day, okay, I'm going to rearrange my room because I need that new drive. And that's the same in the workplace. We have individuals that say, I want everything to stay as it was because that's the only way I can work. And there's other individuals that say, why not try something new? And it's really important to customize or to personalize the change process for employees. And, at least enable them to come up with routines when they are searching for them, so that they can in the end drive the change.
So I think that's great, but how do we identify these? How do we know the different personality types that you're mentioning here? I mean, of course, when we're going into getting ready for a big change, there's those people that we definitely want to make sure that are secured, or maybe we're doing a layoff, and those that are critical employees that we need to have in the workplace that we can't afford to lose them. And so how do we address this appropriately so that we plan effectively?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a tricky one, because I mean, I could just say, oh, we're going to measure personalities at work and then find out who's high in extroversion and who's high in neuroticism. That's not possible. First of all, you can't collect this data on your employees, and you also probably don't want to collect this data on your employees. A lot of countries wouldn't even allow you, like, personality is a protected characteristic, and I don't think we should base any of our decisions on a different on like how, or like when people differ with their personalities. I don't think that should be brought into the organization. However, what we can do is ask people what they need. A lot of the time, employees are not even sure what is wrong with this change process, that they have this emotional reaction to it. So one thing, and that ties back into the point about communication, is asking, what is your biggest concern about this change? What can we do to support you? Do you need more time? Do you want to raise a concern? And it's about the communication there and the feedback, and really, enabling your employee to have a voice in that whole process is one of the key drivers to actually making this work for everyone in the organization. So you can't really identify different personalities, but you can listen to your employees and find out their needs and be open to, cater to different needs, because not everyone will react to the change the same way. But listening to what different people need and what we can do to help them and to best support them to go through this change, I think that is the key point when we think about personalizing this whole process to employees, without necessarily having to send out a questionnaire that asks them about their personality, but maybe just about their preferences.
Okay, so it really starts with planning, right? So
Yeah.
leadership planning, and then I know Sumit mentioned something, earlier about, and you picked it up as well, the change champion. And so Sumit, can you tell us what a change champion is and why they're important in an organization?
Definitely. And I mean, I'll borrow from Sophie's point about routines and how routine seeking is important. Think about this: when you're getting ready for work, if you have a habit of wearing your left shoe first and the right shoe after, and somebody says flip the order, it's stressful. It's not easy, and it consumes a lot of mind space to do it. And that's why you see some of the, you could use the word neurotic, like Sophie did, for high functioning people like Steve Jobs. So the black turtleneck was, of course, image management, and there's there's correlation between resistance to change which is reflected in other behaviors as well. So I think that's how you can identify some of the personality types out there and their resistance to change. And the change champions act as a catalyst, or they lubricate the entire change process. So people who are some kind of influencers or micro influencers, or I mean, if you were to look at something like, say, a Lord of the Rings reference, somebody who's like a Gandalf, somebody who's whispering in your ear saying, it's your decision, it's free will, but if I were you, this is what I'd recommend. And they've got experience, they've got expertise, you look up to them, and they're not positioned to be the hero of the story. They're there to make you the hero of the story. And that's where the impact of the change champion is, that they're trying to enable you to succeed. And that's where organizations can really do well with equipping and enabling them.
And sorry to add to this again, to the change champion. I do think there's a huge misconception as well in organizations about the change champion always being the positive cheerleader that drives the change. Sometimes the change champion in the first stages would come up with their concerns, but at least they would communicate them. And I think that's crucial for every organization, to have people that also question this whole process. Because if you would never have people questioning a change, you would probably stumble across some of the pain points, and you probably never bring up these worries that are moving people. So I think allowing people to also voice negative points or worries about a change will only be constructive for an organization, because that will actually make you more sensitive towards the pain points that a change might have, and the biggest challenges that are out there in that specific organization for the employees of that organization. So a change champion doesn't necessarily mean, we are running there and we say, yes, we want this change, and we're driving it. But they can also be saying, okay, well, I'm happy to help, but here's my concern about it. So listen me out, and then we can talk about how to maybe make some of these points work better for the organization.
Well, absolutely. And I also know that I call it change agents, the early adopters to change oftentimes are also left surprised with all the unpredictable change that happens out there. So even though our organization might be going through a massive technology integration or some massive project when it comes to how we take care of our clients or customers, there are unpredictable changes that are outside of our control. I mean, oh my gosh, did we not just see that a couple of years ago? Unpredictable change and influence the entire globe. So I think also just being ready for unpredictable challenges is also extremely important. You just never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I do understand, I mean, as a change agent myself, the term I always use is about the little tugboat in the Titanic. You might have a whole team of change agents, as little tugboats out there and trying to push the Titanic and help the Titanic maneuver. But if there's not, and getting to Sam's point is all about the communication aspect of helping all levels of the ship understand what direction we need to steer the ship. And also, if half of that ship doesn't know what's happening, they're only going to assume the worst and only assume, absolute devastation, or the ship is going to sink, or something's really bad going on, because I am not hearing anything. I don't know what's going on with this organization. And that leads to fear. And also what Sumit talked about, people leaving the organization. So I'd love to hear what you think about the communication aspects.
One thing real quick before we jump into the communication piece, because I one important part of communication is setting expectations, right? And I think it's almost a primer to communications, to delivering the hard message right at first. So Howard, I know there's plenty of situations where when we're looking at implementing solutions or software and so forth, and of course when we're going through the process of implementing software, we expect it to be very systematic, right? We go step 1, step 2, step 3, but sometimes we come into an issue, and sometimes we know this as an expert. Oh, there's typically an issue here when we look at the employee information, maybe the data doesn't come over right. There's typically something that happens up there, so we can set expectations. And then also there's things that come up during the process that just is a shock to the system. We didn't expect this. And so how do we handle that, Howard, when in those situations?
There's always going to be bumps and things that you can't anticipate ahead of time. I've always found that the best, way of dealing with those types of situations is by sharing it and open communication and talking about, these are the problems that just arose, and this is, the path we're going to take to resolve them. And you get buy-in and support, and people know that change is never, an absolute smooth process. So I think it's, goes back to just really open communication, sharing, and getting people's buy-in, not just at the beginning or at the end, but through the entire process.
So important. But and it takes us to the core issue that I know that everybody wants to jump into, because communication is so critical here.
Yeah,
And I know that Sumit, you have a couple of real life examples that have just happened in the news about some bad communication examples, right? So that have happened out there. And so, Sumit, can you tell us a little bit about what some gaffes that are going on with this recent change, and some examples not to follow?
Oh, definitely. I think the Twitter takeover is a prime example where people have been told you're being fired, and then suddenly somebody says, oh, hang on, that was a mistake. Why didn't you come back and rejoin? Or we accidentally fired you. We didn't realize that you're critical to the new product that our owner wants us to build. And sending out emails to people saying, if you're receiving this on your official mail ID, that means you still have a role here. In case you don't, this mail will go to your personal ID. If you do not hear from us by this date and time, reach out to figure out what's your future role like. And the emails, I mean, it's dreadful. The fact that the email is not signed as a person or even a group, it's signed as Twitter. The best regards, Twitter. I think that's frankly ridiculous, and one of the worst examples of communication that I've seen. But on the same note, almost on the same day, the payments company Stripe announced layoffs as well. And if you look at their communication, it's run by two brothers. One of them is the CEO, the other one is the COO. The email signed by both of them. They start off by saying, we acknowledge that we failed to read the market accurately. We thought we could grow the business faster than it's been growing, and we accept responsibility. Then they've started talking about the employees themselves and said that we've failed you. Nothing really compensates for what's happening, but to help you deal with this change, these are a few of the things that we're doing. So they've got generous severance, they've got health insurance and a few other benefits, but they're not making it sound like they're doing people a favor or an act of charity.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Two examples, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that today also. I did the same line. There was just a Meta has been getting a lot of press lately, especially after their earnings announcement of hey, we're going to spend all this money, basically, and now Zuckerberg just came out today and was saying, oh, we got some things wrong, and there's going to be some layoffs, and he a bit owned it on this video that I saw today about how he misread the market and made a mistake. And so I think some of that vulnerability and humanity is what's demanded in today's marketplace. What do you think, Sophie?
I totally agree with this. So when talking about layoffs, I think it's a common consensus that layoffs are never a nice process. No one wants to do this. No one wants to initiate it. No one wants to communicate it. It's a painful process. Step one to actually, meeting this whole situation is recognizing that it will be painful and recognizing the people that have to do this. It's never easy to do this. I think another point that's really important in this whole process is to own the mistakes that may have happened in the process, to communicate them. Again, big topic of communication there. And while doing that, to remain objective. You know, there's not one organization unit or one area that is preferred over the other when it comes to layoffs, and really recognizing this and communicating this and remaining objective and saying, well, this is where we need people, this is business relevant, as in otherwise we won't be competitive anymore, otherwise we won't be able to fulfill our business objectives that we've set. Communicating this, I think, is also the key. And when laying off, I mean, you will let employees go, and it's not a nice thing, neither for the people that you have to let go, nor for the people that have to stay in the organization. And I think that's a point that you made earlier, Sumit. A lot of organizations forget about the people that are staying. So one thing that is really important when you lay off employees is that you treat everyone with respect while doing it. And that's not only for the people that leave, but the people that stay will see how you treat the ones that you lay off. So if they see that you've done this with a lot of respect, and that obviously you have offered opportunities for them to support them, and maybe reach out to other employees and employers and see if you can kind of find them other opportunities, that is something that people that will stay with your organization will see. And when we talk about commitment, and employee well-being and making someone feel valued by an organization, people that stay in the organization, they will see everything that happens with the layoffs. So if you communicate to them and if you show them that the layoff process has been a respectful and fair process, that is what helps the employees that stay to become more resilient to processes like this, because it's inevitable that people have to be laid off, and there's a high turnover in organizations in general. And it's never a nice process, but if you do this process with respect and you communicate every single stage and the necessity for the layoffs, I think it's easier for people to accept this layoff and accept this change that is happening in the organization.
Go ahead, Sumit.
Agreed. And I mean, another example that I can think of is from almost 13 years ago, right after the subprime crisis. I was an intern at Microsoft, and that's when being laid off was a bit of a layoff was a bit of a dirty word, and if somebody is being laid off, there was a lot of stigma attached to it. It wasn't as commonplace as it is now. And typical assumption was that if you've been laid off, you must have been a terrible employee and there must be something drastically wrong with your performance. So the head of HR sat me down, explained the entire process, and said, I want you to understand, since you're a business student and you're interning, I'd like to explain the entire rationale. So even at that time, Microsoft had this concept of outplacements. So they treated everyone with dignity. They informed people that this has nothing to do with you. It's got everything to do with us. We've got certain projects that we cannot continue because they're not likely to be profitable in the short or the medium term. So we've got to cut the entire project. And therefore, we no longer have these jobs, but we'll give you severance. We'll give you different things like insurance and access to our learning library of courses. We'll arrange for one-to-ones. Back then, mental well-being wasn't such a massive focus area anywhere, but they said we'll arrange for counselors. They also helped people with outplacement and gave them glowing references based on performance. So there's no bad blood. And in fact, I know once things turned around and Microsoft started doing well in the cloud, many of those people did join back. So I think it really strengthens your employer value proposition and increases the belief in the leadership if you treat people nicely. So that's the business side of things. Of course, it is the right and the human thing to do. That goes without saying.
I think you bring up a really good point there, Sumit. And one thing that we should mention is that I think the concept of layoffs have changed over time. It was a significant tool in the past for scaling the business up and down in certain situations. But in today's workplace, we have to realize that there's a lot of different levers to pull. And I think employers need to take a greater responsibility for their people. So right now we have the agile workforce, where you didn't have that years ago. We have gig workers and contractors and consultants, and in some countries they make up the majority of the workforce, matter of fact. And so leveraging this agile workforce can be very important in limiting the amount of layoffs that happen. Also, making sure that leaders are hiring the right people, taking more care in hiring right, and having accountability in their projects is critically important. And I think that's something that's shown its light on in recent terms as well. I mean, I think that we need to up our game as leaders. And when there is a layoff that comes into place, I mean, we need to fall on our sword, because it is our fault, and take that to heart. So, but going back to the topic, Sophie, of employee well-being during this change, what are other things that we can do to help our employees navigate this change in a healthy way?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I want to quickly introduce the concept of change phases. So while every organizational change might be very unique itself, most of the changes have a kind of a phase model underlying that is kind of changing shaping the whole organizational change. And a lot of the time when you introduce a change, the first reaction you'll get is shock. The second reaction you'll get is denial. And then maybe you'll have some people be enlightened about that the idea of the whole change is not a bad one, and they might support it, but then you'll find others that are not yet at the level of acceptance, for example. So I think what's fundamental to every change process is, and it's not always possible in the same kind of way, but what's really fundamental is allowing your employees to participate in the change and to shape the change. So, getting feedback from them about how the process is going, whether they have all the information they need, to be able to drive the change as well, and allowing them opportunities to kind of, again, voice concerns and then shape the process by participating in it. And being able to kind of voice constructive criticism as well. That's really key. And then I think another point that we need to recognize as leaders or people that make decisions in organizations or change managers is that these phases, although they might be, you will find these phases in almost every change process, there is a lot of people that are at different change phases when you start a change. So whereas one person might already be at the point where they accept the change, another employee might still be completely in shock. And I think a common denominator that we need to find is that, or like what would be good to aim for, is to get as most people, as most employees as we can into one phase, so that they at every change process are on the same level, and they can exchange what is moving them, they can exchange what worries they have, and then kind of build a community and use the swarm intelligence to also overcome this change or challenges that you might encounter in this change. So to bluntly put it into 3 words, I think it's really, really helpful when you communicate the change. To get back to that point, you allow people or your employees to participate in the change, and you provide as much information as you can about the objectives of the change, about the change phases, about where in this whole phase, or like where in this whole process, in which phase are you with the organization, and are you still trying things out, or are you actually trying to implement the change already, or you're trying to evaluate the change, whether it has worked, whereas some people might not even have realized that the change is in effect already. So yeah, these key drivers, participation, communication, and information provision, I think are really, really key to every change process.
That's great. Thanks, Sophie. And of course, it's as leaders, it's important for us to help facilitate that process of going through those phases of grief, I guess we could say. But I just recall, as when I've been in some layoff processes, and I just remember, when we're, sitting at my desk and the layoff was announced, and then suddenly, people start disappearing. And once there was an active workplace with people bustling around, and suddenly it's just like dead quiet, and you're sitting in your, and that time I was in my little cubicle, and everybody was huddling, and there was no communication, and so forth. But then, when I think of other processes or other changes of life that we have to deal with, I mean, if you lose a loved one, or you're coping with a person with that in your family that has addiction, things like this, there's like often you can get together and sit down in a group with people that are going through the similar situations and kind of talk about it, have a safe place to have a discussion. And so do you think that this is advised in situations where there's a great deal of change in the workplace, Sophie?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it support group because I do think that for people could come across as like, oh, we are the problem here, whereas they're not. It's valid to not understand the process in the beginning. It's valid to have negative feelings about it, and it's totally fine. But I think the most important thing is that you have a safe space to voice these concerns. And I think to circle back to the personalities and the initial topic that I researched, I think what we need to recognize in organizations is there are certain groups of personalities that just simply need more support, because it's not natural for them to voice, and exchange their concerns with others. So for example, people high in extroversion, they're way more likely to go and rant about something or even vent about something. And that is one really well working coping strategy for resilient employees. Or resilient individuals. It's just getting the feelings out there and, sharing them with people that go through the same process, maybe the same phase in the process even. And and I think for people, for example, for employees high in neuroticism, it's quite important to offer them the safe space to voice their feelings and to voice their concerns, because it might not be naturally they might not be very inclined to naturally go ahead and do that themselves. So, giving them the opportunity to say, well, let's talk about this. What is moving you right now? Why are you hesitant to support this process? That is quite important to support personality types that might be dispositionally more inclined to resist changes, really.
All right. Well, Char, I mean, I know that you've had a number of you've been a part of a large organization and small business and so forth. I mean, what are some of the strategies that you utilize to help your people adapt to change that we haven't discussed so far?
Well, I think we touched on this briefly earlier, and I think understanding the competencies, the drives, the talents, the psychology of our employees is really critical. And I think that is overall the talent management strategy. So for example, how do certain employees deal with stress? How do certain employees deal with constant ambiguity, or what I call VUCA, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexities, and how do individual personalities deal with that? And I think as a proactive way to handle a major unpredictable change or changes that your organization to go through, the more you know your employees and have that very trusting, authentic relationship with your employees, then when major changes happen, then you will do a better job of supporting them. I also think there's aspects of risk management. So for example, Sam, when you talked about, we're hearing everything's getting quiet. Well, mistakes can happen. So for example, in one of my organizations, all of a sudden IT started shutting off all the email accesses for all the 80 employees who are about to be laid off. So how ironic, all the emails all shut off within the morning of the day of the layoff. Huge mistake. Or one leader might send out an email talking about it. So anyway, it's just risk management is critical, and then getting to know your employees. And I've had experience on all of those areas. So that's some of my tips.
Great. Well, I know this has been a very important conversation, but we are coming towards the top of the hour. So I do want to acknowledge our speaker for next week. And so right now we've been talking a lot about change and how to get our employees through it. But just like in any kind of crisis, there's the people that have to make the very tough decisions, leadership, and those HR practitioners out there that are actually facilitating this change. A lot of times they don't want to go through this. They don't want to lay off their best friend or their colleagues that they've developed a relationship with, and this develops a sense of trauma among our leaders in HR. And so who takes care of them? And so we're going to be talking about that next week on the People Strategy Forum, emotional well-being for the HR professional in handling this change. So please join us then as we go through that discussion. All right, so Sophie, back to you. So I just want to reach out to our listeners once again. If you have questions, please put them in the chat or on the social media profile that you're at. Go ahead and drop them there if you have any questions for Sophie. But what other things can you tell us, Sophie, as far as that are important that we haven't discussed yet today that are top of mind?
Yeah, I think just to like kind of combine what we've discussed before is a lot of the time still, and it's quite sad to see that, because I mean well, I'm within this field, so obviously I do live for what I do, and I'm really motivated about what I'm doing in my everyday work life, I want to say. But I think one thing we really should never forget in organizations, it doesn't matter if we are talking about merger acquisitions or major changes, organization crisis, the organization landscape that is changing, or new like ways to work in the future. One thing that we should never forget or neglect is the human part and the human constant in all of this. And everyone is different, and we see that every day, in our reactions and our preferences and in what we like. Everyone has a different favorite color, so I think it's really, really important to just appreciate that we are all different and embrace these differences, because having all the diversity in every single process and allowing everyone to kind of bring up or bring in their personality and their human side, that is what really is super important for organizations going forwards. And that really ties into when we think about new ways to work in the future, and working from home more, and all the digitalization and digital transformation and everything that is changing. We shall never forget that there's people that make up the organization, and without people, without employees, no organization will be able to actually survive. It's not about competitiveness, but no organization would actually exist if there wouldn't be the employees behind it. So I think that is our number one priority in organizations as well, to also put the people first and to enable them to kind of feel well in what they do, and to have an enjoyable time while they're working, because that in the end will drive the profits, that will make you competitive as an organization, and that will bring you into the market. But if we neglect that human side, and that we have employees and like actual human beings sitting there driving all of this, we would never get that far as an organization. So if you want to reach something, never forget about the human side of things.
Well said, Sophie. So I guess the big summary of what we discussed today, the big pieces that were the learning points, I guess we can say here, is that as a leader, if you expect change, and if you're facing change, if that's becoming a risk, I would say set expectations. I mean, you want to communicate, prep people ahead of time that, hey, inflation is looming, business is slowing down. This may have an impact on our business. This may have an impact on us. Giving people time to frame the situation, and then also just having important planning that for change. Don't just stumble out the door and lock all the doors and throw away the key cards and stop the email. I mean, you have to plan about what's going on, right? And so that you don't have these huge gaffes. And so take a moment and plan effectively for the change. Make sure that you understand if there's going to be an impact where people might be leaving and you need some people to stay, make sure that you know how you're going to address that and keep those people that are critical to keep the business going. Then I think the next, what Sophie mentioned is really important, that humanity. Humanity and is more important now than I think than in recent memory. I mean, we've all touched our mortality and going through this past few years, and understanding that some people, they're seeing some of our loved ones depart from the pandemic and so forth, or people that we know. And so life is dear and it's short, and so we need to address that in our management style and how we communicate with people and treat people effectively. And then the next thing that Sophie mentioned was the personalization. People handle things differently. And so understand their different coping styles and how we can move our entire workforce through that effectively as soon as possible is a way to get business back on track and going forward. And then I think finally, and most importantly, is communicate effectively and often and clearly. Right? Did I miss anything there, Sophie?
No, I think that's it. Maybe communicate and let them participate as well, because I do think participation is a big factor. But yeah, no, I think that covers it really, really greatly. That short summary.
Well, Sophie, if our listeners have questions, how can they reach you?
So I think you just shortly mentioned at the beginning, I work for Gradar now. We try to bring, maybe on a different level, but we try to bring, transparency and fairness and equity into organizations by offering a product that allows organizations to evaluate their jobs and define the worth of a job for the organization, define the relative value of that job for the organization. So I work for Gradar. I've got my business email linked as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can also find my calendar linked online, and just book a small consultation with me as well if you like, for like an informal discussion. So yeah, you will find me through Gradar, but you'll also find me on LinkedIn as on a more private side, I want to say. Not connected to the business that I work for. But yeah,
Perfect.
both work.
Well, I want to thank you once again. This has been a wonderful conversation. So, and I think very timely and important for people out there. So thank you so much.
Yeah, really
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you
it.
very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sophie.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. And we'll see you next week on the People Strategy Forum.
Yeah,
Bye.
looking
Very well.
forward.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.